that human price. What is that? What is that worth? So I think we're doing well. I think we're just trying to make it happen. There's people that don't want to stay in a room. There's people that want to just go out the doors, and then there's people that want to stay and make something good come out, because that's what we want our communities to have, right? Isn't that what it's all about? Right?
Can you give us an idea, so standing here, what lake level would have been looking at the landscape before the water was taken out of Owens Lake? We'd be underwater, right?
Well, so in 1850,
That's something.
1850,
Yes.
when the state became a state, it was a relatively wet period, so it would be right here.
Oh, okay.
Anything above that would have been sort of Pleistocene level.
Got it.
When the glaciers were thick.
Sure.
When there were glaciers coming down the canyons and it was a mile thick of ice along the whole Sierra, then it went 20 miles north of Independence. There were fish in it. I mean, the overflow started at Mono Lake. The overflow started at Mono Lake, down in through Bishop, down the Owens River, to Ridgecrest.
At one time, Mono was connected.
You can see the old beach terraces as you're driving up the highway.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen that. So,
it's really, that's where the fish came from, because sometime, even though there's confusion on how it happened, at some time this huge drainage system during the Pleistocene must have connected with the Colorado River, because there were fish up here. And the fish had to get here somehow. So we got it all figured out all the way to Death Valley, and I don't know if a little beyond, but that connection over to the Colorado River,
There's a lot of theories about
not quite sure, but it has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no connection. I mean, fish have to come from the ocean before they're on land, right?
Does the Mojave River have anything to do with that? I just think about it just since it flows the
Maybe.
opposite way,
Yeah.
and it also is kind of in
Maybe
between.
comes out of
Yeah.
San Bernardino.
Yeah.
I don't think this was this is the start of the basin range.
Okay.
So this connected just through what are the valleys? Panamint, Saline, down to Death Valley. That's how this connected. So I don't think there was much connection with the Mojave.
From that long.
Yeah.
Death Valley was, the lake there was 90 miles long and 600 feet deep. And there's wonderful beaches over there you can see. There's places where you can just see up a hillside. You'll just see these lines. They're just like steps, because the lakes went up and down. And there were snails. There were snails here in this lake. We don't have time today, but I can send pictures. I'm thinking of sending you a little raft of photos.
That'd be great.
But we found, there's mollusks out here in layers that showed the lake was fresh. When they did the work out here on the lake, the department for the dust, they got bones of fish or a camel. All kinds of amazing stuff. That's the closest to the time machine you can get, right?
That's
right. All right.
So driving wise, we're going to continue here. You'll see, start to see some open barren ply. You'll start to really see the open expanses. Then you'll see gravel, kind of like this. It is the same type. This is just a staging area. That's why it's denuded. But when you're out there, you'll see gravel, and then we'll get a little bit of managed vegetation. This is a new flavor of managed vegetation. Old is just salt grass, but it's got a lot of diversity. Then we'll start to see the shallow flood ponds. And I was just driving up there. There was a handful of avocets. There's quite a few waterfowl. So we'll see those as we drive by, and then we'll stop at kind of our overlook. And then Linda will let me know whether you guys want to do a little half-mile walk or just hang out and talk a little more.
We'll go to Alabama Gates as well.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, we got.
You might want to,
One's like we have the Sierras over there to your right, and then the White Inyo Mountains over there to your left. Water's flowing down there to the terminal Owens Lake. So I usually start with Lower Owens River project. Just I'll hand it over to Larry. He works more with Lower Owens River. But what you're looking at there is the Owens River pump back station. So part of the goals that Larry will talk about are also making sure we use the water sustainably, and it provides still water to the city of Los Angeles. So that pump back station can pump water back up to the LA Aqueduct. So after it's we water the Lower Owens River can be used for the city of LA. Most times of year, it's actually in the pipeline that continues along that we will drive that provides water to the dust mitigation project. That's most of the year. Right now, when evapotranspiration is low, we don't need that much water, so it's going back to the LA aqueduct. As water use increases, as it warms up, we'll need to use more of that water down on Owens Lake. And then during the summertime as well, we don't operate many of the dust control measures. The water is pumped back to the LA aqueduct.
Yeah, Jeff, you were going to mention the pipe, the delivery of the water here? Jeff?
I was gonna hold off on Owens
Okay.
Lake.
Cool.
To talk for.
Oh, okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Larry Freilich. I work for the Inyo County Water Department, and we help manage, we cooperatively with Los Angeles manage the Lower Owens River project. So that's why I'm here today.
As part of the water
As
agreement.
part of the water agreement, and
Mitigation.
I am actually going to hand over some of my time for 5 minutes to Mike Prather, who can describe how the Lower Owens River project, which this is all about, came to be. Have you already spoken to them about that?
No.
Do you
I
wanna
did
do-
talk about the agreement, which is triggered by the second aqueduct
Okay.
and its impacts.
Yeah, I thought you wanted to just talk about how water came to this river.
Right, so.
This river didn't have water.
You know, in 1913, the first aqueduct was finished, right? So 30 miles north of this, 62 miles if you are in the channel, is where the river is cut off and put into the aqueduct to go to Los Angeles. So in 1913, they cut the river off there. So 62 miles of the river was more or less dried up. There were still some wet places for springs and overflow from grazing leases and irrigation. So when the groundwater pumping started to fill the second aqueduct, and it was a lot, water levels went down depending on where you were, and those had some impacts on vegetation and on springs. So, but they were hard to quantify. It was very hard to, on a map. I mean, you knew if a spring stopped flowing, that was easy. But if you're in some wetlands, marsh, or a change in veg, sometimes that's hard to quantify. So for mitigation, for impacts for groundwater pumping, Inyo and LA agreed that they would rewater that 62 miles of river as a mitigation. It's the centerpiece mitigation of the water agreement. Because that's a big deal. It's a big commitment for Los Angeles, and it's a big get back for Inyo County, for the people that live here in the Owens Valley. So that's kind of how it got to be.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So that's the back.
Yeah,
that's
it's a major achievement. It's the largest mitigation project under the agreement. And as Mike says, if you wander up there about 30 miles, 60 river miles, because the river, this is such a flat river that it's usually about 2 to 1. So you go a mile upstream, and you've actually, well, you go a mile linear,
miles
you get
upstream.
2 miles upstream. So it's a twisty, windy river. But the goal of the project, it's called the Lower Owens River Project, LORP, it's common, or LORP, is 78,000 acres of area that we're working under to try to recover the environment, the habitat. And the main goal is to recover it for threatened and endangered species, and it has the other goals are sustainable agriculture and recreation. So to keep the existing uses, traditional existing uses, but then recover the ecosystem. The project, the water was added in 2007.
December
basically.
6th,
2006.
2006.
I call it 2007 because we just had a couple weeks, but yes.
We waited a long time for it.
We waited a long time for it. That's right. And the water it's under court mandate, the water is to be 40 cubic feet per second at all times, at all stations. There are measuring stations, 4 stations up and down, up the river. They have to maintain, LA has to maintain 40 cubic feet per second. Once a year, if there's enough water, this year there'll be plenty of water, we release up to 200 cubic feet per second down the river. And the goal there was to create a habitat flow, to mimic a natural flow system. Problem is, the natural flow system, something like a year like this, you'd have 3,000, 4,000 cubic feet per second. The floodplain would be inundated. We put 200 CFS down our river, and it doesn't even get out of the river channel. So we've not been able to reach a lot of the goals we like to do. This is one of these kind of big experiments. It's a controlled system. You release water, you think you're going to do one thing, and it doesn't really do what you want. But the project's adaptively managed, so we're looking at the project. It's not doing the scour. There's still lots of tules and cattails, marsh growing up right in the river channel. So we're looking at different types of flows and other ways we can treat the river and get it going on its own. The idea is not to maintain it over time, but actually to find a natural regime or an artificial regime that mimics as much as possible natural regime. But this is, we're just playing God here. Generally doesn't work as well as we had hoped. But, this is the end of the line right here, and this is, as you guys were told, the water comes down the river. It's kind of an unusual thing. Instead of going into a lake where fresh water is not necessarily needed, causing more dust than good, the water enters here, and up to 50 cubic feet per second is then pumped back up into the aqueduct. Now there's other needs. Some of the water is shunted down into the lake. So that's a little pressure vessel. You're wondering what that nice circular thing is. It keeps the pipes from bursting if the water levels change. But yeah, the water is pumped all the way back up to the aqueduct and cuts back to LA, other than the water that's needed in the lake. I don't know, we'll hopefully have enough time just to have a stop and we actually look over the floodplain. At that point, I'll give you a little more information. But if you have any questions.
I have a comment.
Or a comment?
I always have. In California, we lost these what are called riparian areas. These are these rich willow, cottonwood areas along streams and rivers and creeks. Most of what we lost was in the Central Valley, the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin. But we lost a measure of it here too. That is some of the richest wildlife and productive habitats that occur. But you can imagine how important they are in a desert, because you can be swimming or floating in the river and then get out and walk 50 feet and you're in a desert. It's just amazing.
Contrast is stunning.
It's just amazing. So the whole idea and the reason there should be praise given to Inyo County and the city of Los Angeles is that they've actually put water back in, which is very rare, right? Usually it's going the other way, long ago. But they're actually putting water back in and trying to make something good happen, and it's hard. So I kind of always sing the praises of everyone involved in that. And we're all just trying to make it work. I don't think it'll be fixed in my lifetime, but I'm hopeful that later it will. I have daughters and I have grandchildren.
So, how do you prioritize which projects you do first, which mitigation practices to look into first, which ones to experiment with? Is there like a hierarchy in terms of like human use and then natural resources?
Yeah, well, a lot of the mitigation is prescribed legally, based on environmental review, CEQA review. There'll be a number of mitigation measures that are prescribed. And so I don't know if any have priority over others. Some are harder to achieve. We have revegetation goals that have been decades and we've not met objectives. Just to get native vegetation to grow in an area where agriculture was abandoned. LA bought up the agricultural land, didn't water it, soil blew away. It's really hard to get that to work. The river is kind of a new beast. It's one of the newer mitigation projects. But as far as prioritizing, it has to do with a lot to do with CEQA. It has to do with the environmental review and what the environmental review comes up with.
Well, there are some guidelines, like grazing practices have to continue. I mean, this cannot influence and displace that. And the city lands all have public access virtually. virtually all of them. People can come up here and you can hike and ride and on a horse or whatever, and you can hunt, and it's one of the big open areas in the state of California. But the prioritization, I think, is maybe better described as more of these guidelines of things that aren't supposed to be removed, things that are supposed to stay present. We wanted the benefits. We didn't want any negative aspects. The wildlife species, like the fish, the native fish were all gone years ago. I think the Owens River sucker is still in there. It was an important Paiute food for the native people that live here. Its bones are the #1 bone in the middens along the river. But the pupfish and some of the other species, dace, and they're gone when people started putting crawdads in the river, bullfrogs in the river, bass in the river, catfish in the river that ate all the native fish. But I think we try to make it, if possible, that in the future we try to reintroduce those things in some measure somehow, that it's possible. That's kind of a goal. Write this website down. Inyo County Water Department has a very rich website. It has all the science studies. It has the entire water agreement. It has the entire history of water, Inyo and LA's relationship. Inyowater.org. It's a simple one. Inyowater.org.
It is a good site. It's everything you need to know about water in the Owens Valley. And the annual reports are great if you want to know how they measure water depth or vegetation success or what have you. They're kind of interesting reports.
LADWP.com, but it's a little more.
It's harder to get to.
If you search, if you go to LADWP.com and then search Owens Lake, search Owens Valley, search Owens River, maybe some of those things pop up.
Yeah.
It's a little. You can get there eventually.
We have links to most of LA's, not to the lake.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But we have links to most of the
But I
stuff
mean,
on the
that's
Inyo
just
water.
really super. Those websites. God, you can spend a lot of time there.
I saw signs for elk. Do you guys still get a number of elk in the valleys too, and have the numbers decreased due to the water?
We do have elk in the valley. They're not a native population. They were transplanted here quite a while ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Late 20s.
Late 20s. But they are free roaming. So there are quite a few of them. I think the herd is a couple hundred strong, probably up and down the valley, all the way up to Bishop or near Bishop, probably just a little south of there. And I think their numbers are pretty steady.
Probably doing better here than they are in their native range. Where Thule elk
Are they Thule?
Thule elk.
They're Thule elk.
Smallest
So
subspecies.
where they were found is we thought the Thule elk were extinct in California until sometime after 1900 when this rancher over in Buttonwillow, what a great place, what a great name, great California name. Somewhere east of Bakersfield, out there in Buttonwillow, and he had all this marsh and tules and stuff, and he had Thule elk, he had a band of Thule elk there. So what I've read, and there's been some good studies on this, is that some of that group came here, and then the others, 28 or so, came from Yosemite Valley. They were not native in Yosemite Valley, and so the Park Service in the late 20s wanted them out. And so the man that built the Dow Villa Motel in Lone Pine, Walter Dow, big booster. In the 20s, everybody was a booster. Yeah, let's get her done. Pave that road, build that hotel, start that lumber yard. Let's get some elk in here. So he actually drove one of the trucks, and so that's how they got it. And the city of Los Angeles is their land. They agreed. Yeah. So now we got 5 bands and 500. We're trying to have a cap on them, I think, so they don't eat the place up.
Right.
Yeah, elk can eat too much.
And do they bring any like non-native species and stuff too? Have you noticed
The elk?
anything like that? Yeah.
I don't know, not that I know of.
No?
We lost some riparian species along the river. Like there was a group, a scientific group that came through here in 1891, It was called the Death Valley Expedition. They actually started in Death Valley, and then they came through here, did the Owens Valley, and then they went south and over the Sierra down the Cahuilla River into the San Joaquin Valley. They had just supreme ornithologists and mammals people, and Colville, the botanist, he's the one the checker mallow is named after, the Owens Valley checker mallow. But they collected birds like yellow-billed cuckoo, Bell's vireo, least Bell's vireo, willow flycatcher, and we have the willow flycatcher back nesting up by Bishop. Occasionally there's a cuckoo seen, and I think someone may have seen near Big Pine at least Bell's vireo, but we don't have them back, breeding in really sustainable numbers. So
On the willow flycatcher, we have half of the entire population in California that occurs right on the Owens River.
Wow.
So they do very well here, partly because it's undeveloped. There's probably a lot of reasons.
yeah, this is truly one of the great places. This owned by the city of Los Angeles. It's just amazing. I mean, they're killing themselves working on the LA River. Larry and I know a lot of the LA River people. We've lived in urban situations where a little bit of good stuff is great. You know, if you can get a 3-acre park along the LA River, Marsh Park, Steelhead Park, something like that, and you have something, you have some gold there, you know. Well, they have 1/3 of a million acres up here. So there's a number of species that are really feeling good up here, and they're in trouble elsewhere. Harriers, the marshhawk harrier is really a shrike. The loggerhead shrike is you always just see lots of them out here, and they're really in trouble elsewhere. So this is a beautiful, prized place. When I started working with DWP on water issues as an activist person, long ago, I think there were like 3 biologists in their offices, and now there's over 20.
Over 20.
Over 20.
Yeah, one of the things that's
And a
good
lot
point.
of them are females.
Yeah. So that is something, and Linda, you might have already pointed this out, but basically the entire valley from the Inyo to the Sierra, heading all the way up through Bishop and beyond, is owned by the city of Los Angeles. And it does function kind of as a preserve. You don't see development. That's why, we do have kind of a rich environment here.
We're lucky.
We're very lucky. So Phil Peaster, former Fish and Wildlife, said this is about as close as you can get to a national park without a national park. He's much more eloquent than that, but you remember his quote? Anyway, the valley is beautiful.
He has a good quote I want to use when we wrap up.
Oh, you got that.
Ask me about Phil Peaster's quote at the end, and
I've got to remember that, okay. Phil Peaster is a guy that, with a couple of buckets and a friend, saved the population of the Owens River pupfish once when he got a call at the office saying, this is a story you can look up too online, just Google Phil Peaster pupfish. And they went out to this place, and the water was low in this one area, spring area or something, and the fish were literally, flopping in the mud, and they just started chucking them in these plastic buckets, and kind of kept them going.
very good. So I want to add a little bit to what you were saying, Larry, on the LORP. You heard him say a couple court ordered and 40 CFS. That was in a document. It was about 40 CFS. We gave that to a bunch of lawyers, and they came up with this very strict regime of what that means. So what has happened, you guys probably very well know, a river is dynamic, right? But we have a court-ordered 40 CFS, and a court-ordered this flow. And, as Larry said, we're not meeting goals. So back to what Mike was saying, and I was trying to allude to, is you get what a lawyer thinks a natural system should be, and you don't allow experts that kind of understand. You don't give them a framework to work with. Although we do have some adaptive management, we are fairly handcuffed by these very strict documents. So you have a river that functions kind of like another aqueduct. Steady water flows, not a diverse system. So I do want to contrast with that with some of the lake stuff. So you can transition over to lake. Yeah. All right. So I like to start kind of how the lake formed. We all said it was a terminal basin. As we all are very well, climate is dynamic. 16,000 years ago, we would be under 300 feet of water. Owens Lake went way up past Independence. If we were standing here around 1850, we would probably have our toes wet from Owens Lake. Owens Lake came up this far. And sort of before I move forward, Owens Lake was a series of connected lakes all the way through Death Valley. There was a tremendous amount of water coming from the Sierras. It was a very different place. We'll see a little poster where we had giant ground sloths and camels. It was a very different climate here. So fast forward, when LA did build the aqueduct, lake levels were going down, but that took away the major source of water to Owens Lake, and that became the largest source of dust. If you hear PM10, particulate matter under 10 microns, really small stuff that can get deep in your lungs, worst source in the U.S. So there was an effort, how do we fix that? And it's been a 20-year effort. I think I'll save a little bit of that and introduce how we do it. Most of it is through water-based methods. And the pipeline that we mentioned comes through here, can provide 20 cubic feet per second for a lot of the year. We use 75,000 acre feet of water every year to control dust. More than the city of San Francisco needs the entire year. We use a lot of water down there. The most common methods is very water intensive. It's called shallow flooding. We just flood the playa, that keeps dust down. The next common method is called managed vegetation, where you grow vegetation on this very saline playa. You grow native vegetation, some of which you can kind of see out there. It's brown. It's the grass. It's called saltgrass. It's an incredibly salt-tolerant plant that you can actually grow on the playa. So that's the second method. We have a third waterless method that has been used for a few square miles. It's just gravel, where you literally take a mountain and stick it on the playa. Very expensive, but it doesn't use any water.
30 million a square mile, maybe. To do the whole thing. 30, 40.
$1 million per square mile.
Per square mile. Yeah. And then, as we've sort of got the problem under control, we've come up with some different methods that we're able to control dust that are a little more waterless, a little bit more cost friendly. One of them is called tillage, where you take and roughen the soil. So you create roughness that breaks it's called fetch, the distance that wind can pick up speed to collect dust. So that is a great method. It's not permanent. Gravel is pretty permanent. Tillage over time, for lack of a better word, melts. The worst thing for tillage is rain, because we get a lot of rain. And so it decreases the roughness, and that allows the fetch to kick up, and then you could potentially have dust problems. That is a fairly new method we've started. We actually have probably 3 square miles or so that's tillage. And then another method that is fairly new, it's coming up, is using salt itself to control dust. Where you use the right amount of salt, you can make just called brine, where you use a really hypersaline condition, does not evaporate hardly at all. It just locks up the water, and so that itself is a very effective dust control measure. So those are some of the tools we have to control dust. Like I said, alluded to, it's been pretty successful. We are probably 99% controlled. But as I said, we use a lot of water, and it's cost about, I think we're up to about $2.2 billion. That's billion with a B. So that's a lot. That's capital costs, and my time, 60 other full-time employees. And then the other big one
Green jobs. Green jobs.
The other big one is replacement water. So water we use on Owens Lake has to be bought, comes from the Delta. You're well aware of issues of getting water from the Bay Delta. So those are some of the things that have come together. I think we'll save a good part of the rest of the story of how we're pulling those pieces together and I'll hand it over to Mike. I'm sure he's got stuff to add on how
You have something to say.
on how this was a dust control program at first. There was little thought, if any thought, to other values at the time. It was get her done, get it done. Doesn't matter the cost. Get it out there. Get it under
clock
control.
ticking, wasn't it? I mean, they were
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So
there's
fines and stuff.
Totally, yeah. I've been working on a project that's been on the books for 25 years. It hasn't broken ground. and this one we've controlled 45 square miles. It's amazing how fast. The department doesn't move fast, but this is pretty amazing how quickly we've done 45 square miles of dust control. So there's a lot more to the story that I'm going to save for our next stop. Mike, do you want to?
Well, real quick,
Do
yeah.
you mind if I interject real quick?
Please do.
Yeah, I'm not just a sign holder, although that is. It's hard to get a word in.
Speak up.
No, I like what we've done here. You know, we've talked about the Lower Owens River project and then transition it into Owens Lake. And we are actually standing at the transition between those two. As we drove in, this crossing right here, we crossed the Owens River. You know, it's a very big project, but the river itself only at 40 CFS right now. You may not have even noticed. So this is actually where we cross the Owens River, and it transitions into what doesn't get pumped back up to the aqueduct, flows into Owens Lake. Here is the Owens Lake Delta, or the Owens River Delta. And so it's a transition area between the river and the lake. And we can see that here on the map. I just want to, I have this here so we can look at it. So we are way up here at the north end of this map. And so this is where the delta begins. So this is just downstream of us in that direction. Unfortunately, we don't have a great vantage point, but you can see how this branches out. Even though it's a relatively small river, it does branch out or braid out like a delta you'd expect. And so that flows through here. These are all our dust control cells, and we'll probably get into that more at our other stop. All these are the various types of dust control that Jeff talked about: shallow flood, managed veg, gravel, tillage, etc. But the Owens River Delta flows through here and then enters what's called the remnant brine pool. So that is the remnant of Owens Lake, the terminal lake. And it fluctuates greatly depending on the precipitation and how much runoff and flow we get through the river. Currently, due to all the rain we've had and the lack of evaporation, the brine pool is fairly large right now. Like the other day I was right here, I could see it. It's probably covering quite a bit of this.
So from the highway.
This is
water on the lake.
The reflection.
yeah, you can see it on the highway coming in too, because that's a better vantage point. This aerial image that this map was made out of was taken at a dry period, so there's hardly any of the brine pool here, if at all. So right now it would look a lot different from a satellite view or an aerial view.
I'm going to ask them to get you a newer map.
Yeah, we should. This one's a little outdated.
Really nice in that corporate.
We're ready for a new one for sure. So just wanted to give you a little orientation to where we are now up at the north end, and we're going to continue to drive down through these dust control cells, and we're going to turn here and come up and see this area, which is a very neat kind of a hybrid area, we call it, where there's shallow flood areas, there's managed vegetation, and there's gravel all mixed together. And it's a neat area.
It's a good way to show it, kind of show as much of it as you can.
Yeah. So feel free to ask questions about any of these areas. And
Dakota has a question.
I have a question. How does the gravel management, how does that affect the native vegetation, seed dispersal, and like the wildlife? Because I don't really see like vegetation growing where you have the gravel so much.
right, so you wouldn't. It
Okay.
affects it in the sense that you wouldn't have any vegetation growing in that area.
It's good for spiders and lizards, though. So you got a big explosion of lizards that have followed the gravel on the roads all the way out to the center of the lake. They're little side blotch lizards. Their genus is Uta, U-T-A, side blotch lizard.
If we could get vegetation, we wouldn't need gravel. That's the
Right. Yeah.
So those sites were chosen as areas that weren't conducive to grow vegetation, so gravel.
So you'll get
Okay.
you'll get a view. It's hard. You'll get a view of what as you go out there, what just barren playa, and that was what all the lake looked like. 110 square miles worth. So you'll sort of see like how stark things were, and that caused a dust problem. That gravel keeps dust down.
Yeah, because some places you just can't grow anything. It's just, there's parts of the lake that are nice and sandy with a little bit less salt, especially near the river around the edges. And then as you get out into the lake, you get into clays and just a nightmare of stuff. But they have, really world-class experts, consultants, companies that worked all over the world, so that worked on that vegetation. They worked with the Native Plant Society chapter here to develop the list of plants that would be chosen, because the requirement is they have to be native species in this region. So it's close to 40 species. We're going to see it. You're going to actually see it. I just had one thing when the questions are finished.
Well, and Jeff just mentioned real quickly, 110 square miles. That's the area of Owens Lake. That's a huge expanse, 110 miles. And what are we up to? Just over 50% of dust control of the area.
Yeah, 45 square
45%. So it's 45 square miles of dust control. So almost 50% of the area that is under dust control.
And when was that started? The
2001.
Did you
Came
say?
on
Came online?
November of 2001.
Yes,
when it came online?
When it
The
sort of broke.
studies began in 1978. The agreement was reached in 1998, and the water came on in 01. The big sanction.
And it's been a phase. So 2001 was the first phase, which is about 10 square miles.
Yeah,
It was big.
There's been 10 different phases of construction to reach those 45 square miles that are currently out there. And you know, it's a fairly calm day today, but you know, all these storms we've been having. Just the other day, there were probably 40, 50 mile an hour wind gusts out here. And there was not very much dust, at least not emanating from Owens Lake. Whereas in the past, 20 years ago, it would be, I'm sure Mike can attest, how horrible the dust clouds were
Almost
off
20
Owens Lake.
years of that.
Yeah.
Moved here in 80.
And,
Some bad ones.
And the Department of Water and Power recognized that as a problem, you know, and took responsibility for it and initiated this process of the dust control program.
There's a book that's out of print now, I think, but you can get it. It's a good book. Deals with Mono Lake and Owens Lake. It's called Storm Over Mono, and it has a lot of the. Even though it's a lot about Mono Lake and the struggle up there, it does deal with some of this at Owens Lake. My final comment is that kind of to fill in part of the story is that the city is using a huge amount of water out of the lake, like Jeff talked about. This is how much it costs. This is how many people it would serve, and you know, and that's real. That's real. But the other side of the coin that you have to understand too, that makes it a little easier to swallow, is that the people up here breathed that dust for over 80 years. All this whole valley. One time in the north wind, that dust went all the way to San Bernardino. And they were breathing that. These particles are so small, they go to the deepest parts of your lungs, like Jeff said. They can go through a cell membrane. They're in your bloodstream in seconds and straight to your brain. So, and throughout your body. So there's you have to think of that. You have to think of that, and how much, what was the cost of that? You know, so it makes you think a little bit less, you know, because you have to think about budgets, you have to think about ratepayers and floating bonds and having the future pay for it. But there's
We introduced Owens Lake in the dust control program. The big part of Owens Lake was, at least for wildlife, it was a happy accident. It became this great migratory stopover it once was hundreds of years ago. So there was a concern of DWP wanting to, after you have the water out, to try to conserve water. So there's an ongoing effort to try to collaborate with all of the different stakeholders and regulatory agencies to make sure it's not just dust control that's thought about. It's other aspects. It's cultural resources. It's habitat value, along with water conservation. State lands, they manage technically the lake. We lease it from them. They're very interested in
you guys own it.
public trust values. Yeah. So with that effort, we, on one of the fairly recent phases, we tried to take all those concepts and put them together. This area 15 years ago was barren, open, dusty playa. 10 years ago, it was shallow flood. Shallow flood uses about 4 acre-feet per acre. Now, on average, this area probably uses 2 acre-feet per acre. So one of the ways we did that was we integrated a bunch of different dust control measures that, like gravel, for instance, not a particularly useful thing for wildlife. The other concern was aesthetics. So one of the new things is let's try to take gravel and make it a little more aesthetic. Make a trail out of it. Notice there's different types of gravel. There's vegetation in it. So you've got a waterless dust control, costs a little more, but it is way more aesthetic, and that was a very important thing for State Lands Commission, to not have a monoculture. If you do it right, you put gravel next to water. Gravel, there's some birds that really like to use gravel. This gravel you're standing in now, plovers actually like nesting it. Snowy plover is our sort of marquee bird. They take these little chips and they make a nest out of it. We often have to deal with them nesting on our roads, so making areas that are off the roads they can use is a benefit to operations. So the big crux of how this was done was we got together with local experts and scientists and developed a habitat suitability model. So we quantified what sorts of things these birds needed. You know, do they need a certain water depth, a certain salinity? So part of the redesign of this was to regrade the pond. We added islands. We graded it so it was relatively shallow. Generally when we do Owens Lake, do it fast, so you just put up a berm, fill it up, and so you have a lot of deep area. Our ducks here are dabbling ducks. They like to be on the surface. Shorebirds here, short-legged, like shallow water. So by regrading this, using, actually saving water, and it's more beneficial to the wildlife using it. So this is the direction that we're trying to go with Owens Lake, is meet multiple goals. Think about the cultural resources. This was when Native Americans are still here, but Native Americans used the edge of the lake extensively. It was a great resource for them. So we need to protect the resources and the evidence that they were there. So that's the idea, is to bring all these pieces together, and if you collaborate and do it right, you can meet multiple goals. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I could say a lot, but
So to give you a picture of how, I think Bill pointed out, we started up here where my finger is. We drove, felt like a long way, but we're only standing right there. So there's a ton more area that you're not going to see. There's a lot. 45 square miles is hard to comprehend. So there's a lot more work to be done to sort of incorporate these same concepts.
Well, and what did you see along the way? A lot of birds,
there are a lot of birds out there.
a lot of water,
Many
Yeah.
different kinds of birds.
gravel, right?
Saw the tillage.
Tillage, a little bit. I don't know if we've passed any major tillage areas, kind of that remnant.
I can send a photo
No
to
dust.
Linda of
Yes.
tillage. I've got a
Great.
little drone shot of some tillage. So I'm going to try to send a group of photos. You guys could do it too if it's appropriate.
Yeah.
To Linda, she could get to the students.
Well, there are various ways that, for the shallow flood areas that we apply the water to the ponds. And that's kind of evolved over time as we've discovered better ways, more efficient ways to apply the water. It used to be kind of just put a pipe out and flood an area. And as you drive along, and even right here off to our right, you can see kind of one of the latest ways to do it is through sprinklers. So might have seemed like an obvious thing to put out there as sprinklers, irrigation sprinklers, but it seems to be a more efficient way to wet the soil in a more uniform way. So it's an example of how kind of we've learned as we've gone how to apply the water. I also want to expand on something Jeff mentioned, the snowy plover. He called it our marquee bird. Now, you guys, I'm sure from where you're at, have heard of the snowy plover out on the beaches out there. So we do have the snowy plover here as well. One of the reasons it's one of our marquee birds is because it's a species of special concern here, which is similar to a threatened or endangered species. And so one of our major mitigation measures as far as biological resources is to protect the snowy plover here. And it does breed here. So it migrates here. It's actually a distinct population segment from the birds that breed on the coast. So they're distinctly separate from those. And they migrate here and they do breed here. So we want to protect those breeding snowy plover here. And we have a lot of construction mitigation procedures so that our construction crews know how to watch out for them. One of my main duties is actually survey for their nest before any construction activities occur. And also just make people aware of visitors and construction personnel alike. So it's a lot of work, but it's important to help protect that biological resource. It's an important one here.
They're really cute.
Sorry. What's your title?
My title
Yes.
is a watershed resources specialist.
And that involves that and other things.
And other things, yeah. One of the great parts about this job is there's a large diversity of duties. That
These
just
are
happens
both-
to be one of my main projects.
Both biology people.
Yeah, so that's my background is in wildlife biology. So, yeah.
When does their nesting season start here, and where do they typically nest?
It starts in about 6 days.
Realistic.
Yeah, March 15th.
15th of March.
So they're just
Yeah.
waiting down there. They're waiting to come in. It starts March 15th and goes until August 15th. And the plovers primarily like to nest on the open playa. Their primary defense against predators is camouflage or isolation, right? So they like to nest all by themselves in kind of desolate areas. They have grown to like this road-based gravel, so they do like to nest on the roadways, which is probably not the best adaptation, but I think that some of the berm roads out here, they are out in the middle of nowhere and they're elevated, so they might give them better view of predators coming or able to see them approaching. So
Ravens and coyotes.
ravens and coyotes are definitely their main predators out here.
Do you guys get killdeer?
We do, yeah. I've heard at our last stop. I heard some out there by the river.
They could
Yeah.
be nesting right at your
They'd be right through here too. Yeah, killdeer are very common everywhere, and those are very closely related to killdeer and the snowy plover. Yeah. So, yeah.
Good question.
Good. We talked about our marquee bird. Yeah.
About how long did the habitat suitability modeling take? Or is that something that's ongoing?
Yeah, so I think this is we have various iterations. This is our third iteration. It's been a process we started probably around 2013, start developing it. Yeah, and so it's developed specifically for Owens Lake to understand both breeding birds here and the big bird numbers that come through are just simply migrants. So shorebirds in particular will come here and you can get 100,000 birds coming through to go breed elsewhere.
in a day, on a single day.
And Jeff was one of the main creators of our habitat suitability model, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think he's very modest, but he's the brainchild behind it for sure.
Yeah, he is very modest.
Yeah.
So, following up on the legal constraints on LORP, here we have dust control orders. We have a little bit of flexibility in how we implement them. So we don't, there's always a little litigation involved, but we've had a little more flexibility on how we meet the goals. Control dust, figure it out. So we had a lot more tools in our toolbox to play with. And instead of a court order saying, you will gravel this area and you will do this, we were able to collaborate and figure out what goes where best. And so that gave us this success story during this last drought where there was not enough resources, not enough water to meet all needs in the valley. On Owens Lake, we were able to save 10,000 acre feet because we got together and figured out we need to control dust. How do we do that? Good metric was tillage. That was done easily, quickly. We got some permission from the district. We figured it out so we weren't impacting habitat value. And we were able to save a substantial amount of water when, if we didn't, then other users were just simply not going to have to go without.
You're waiting for me?
Well, I was going to hand it over to you. I figured you'd have. Mike has been working on Owens Lake longer than anybody.
Maybe
so.
almost longer than you're alive. Are you 39? My daughter turned 39 this year. Are you sure?
Go ahead.
You're
Yeah,
good?
no. So, yeah.
Okay. We work together a lot. I'm a different kind of environmentalist. I kind of feel you need to build bridges and not burn them, because someday if you need the bridge, it's not there anymore. You know, you just end up with a bunch of wreckage. You know, I mean, there's times that you disagree. There's times I've worked with groups that had DW people in witness chairs in court. But here at Owens Lake, we didn't have to do any of that, and some of it was built on the history of Mono Lake. You're going to hear. Up there, they had a landmark decision that the wildlife had to be considered in talking about water and Mono Lake, and it was a legal term called a section of law called public trust. Public trust goes way back in law. It goes back to like English common law. I don't know if it goes back into some of the Roman stuff, but you can Google public trust. Is very interesting. What the court ruled, and this went to the Supreme Court in California, said that Mono Lake was declining. And you could see the future. It was going to be so salty, there'd be no brine shrimp left, no brine shrimp, there's no lunch, there's no birds there. Right? So the court ruled that there are certain things that are owned in common, you know, like air, things like that. But one of them is water also. And that clearly the water, Los Angeles had the permission to use. They had the water right, it's called. It's more of a permission kind of thing. To use that water, but because they own that, but the wildlife is owned by the people of California. And that had to be balanced. And there's actually a legal term for the balancing. So that had to be worked out. So that ended a very expensive lawsuit up there with what's called the public trust decision. And it was kind of worked out from there. When there has been a legal decision, any side goes along with it because we're a nation of laws. You know, we're not a bunch. It's not a bunch of anarchists. So the city has been doing wonderful stuff. They're working on streams, doing airplane flights and counting birds, and just doing great stuff. So that decision came down here when all the birds showed up, because for a number of years, my friends with the department would I like to joke them when they're around. Some of them, they aren't here today, but I like to joke that I'm kind of thinning on top from being patted on top of the head for so long. That Mike, this is not a wildlife project. This is a dust project, and they were right. That was true. But there were thousands of birds, so we began to share bird information with Department of Fish and Wildlife of California and the State Lands Commission that owns the land. That there were a lot of birds there. We need to talk about that. Then, as just a local Audubon person, just a grunt, I began working with friends that are more paid people. We call them the suits. You know, the environmental side has plenty of suits as well. Believe me. So trips to Sacramento to work with them, to call in some favors of things in the past. And they began being involved at a state level, which got the attention of higher level DWP workers in LA, senior managers, our bosses. And so we began to have some meetings about the lake. You know, we have grazing, we have mining, we have dust, we have birds, all these things going on. And we began to have some informal meetings in Bishop for about 2 years. And then one day, one of the senior managers came in the door. Instead of just local Bishop office DWP, it was Bill Von Wagner. Nice guy. Smart, good adversary, he was honest. And he began talking about water, and we, as Audubon folks, said, look, we know the amount of water you're using at Owens Lake is a horror story for you. And we're willing to talk with you about saving significant water if you're willing to talk about habitat. And so he began talking to the staff, consultants, and they said things like Jeff said, we could put in a meadow up there where the water doesn't have to be on all the time on the mud, and we can grow habitat with less water. And he said, if you can do that, then I can get my superiors to say yes. Water and Power Commissioner and General Manager, those kind of folks. So we began working on that. And the elephant in the room was the public trust decision at Mono Lake. We never had to bring that up. I heard it in one conversation, but we never had to do any legal things in dealing with the habitat. The City of Los Angeles, through the Department of Water and Power, we just began to come together the idea of a master project that would be a three-legged stool. You got to fix the dust. That's number one. Save water and habitat, a three-legged stool. And that's kind of what it's based on, really. And it's going pretty well, I think. Going pretty well. And
it's a great example of a collaborative
Yeah,
process
very
as
much
opposed
so.
to a litigated.
You know, because we were Audubon folks, okay, so we weren't a project person, the Dust Project, and State Lands is like an agency, right? They're based on laws and everything. We're just voices of people, an interest group. We were special interests. I love that when I hear that in political things, just as a kind of a special interest, and they spit. Everybody's a special interest, aren't they? I mean, how can you say that? One of the big things Audubon did is that there were times that some of the other parties went after each other. And that was kind of the department and the dust people, state and local. And I remember we lost one entire year where we didn't really meet. And it was unfortunate because we kind of got along with everybody, we like to think. And we worked as hard as we could to have people stay in the room and talk to each other. And that's the way it eventually played out, not necessarily through what we did, but that's the way it played out, and that's what you have here. You have a wildlife and a dust control area. You have air that is now safe for people to breathe. And you have a wildlife that is now part of an international network of wildlife areas called the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, which extends from Tierra del Fuego in South America and Patagonia to the Arctic. There's 104 sites, and this is one of them. This was built by the Department of Water and Power and others joining them to make something. And they're paying for it.
Mike,
That's all I have.
Mike, are you going to make a pitch for the Bird Festival?
Oh, Bird Fest.
We've got all sorts of.
Because that's another, that shows you if those bridges are still there, you can just walk across and just keep going. We have an Owens Lake Bird Festival. Our 5th one is next month. It's the 3rd weekend in April. We're almost sold out right now. And we have tours all through the lake and the surrounding areas. We have geology tours, we have history tours, we have a guy that does the film history tours associated with Owens Lake, Alabama Hills and botany, and then lots of trips out to see the birds. And the Department of Water and Power every year has given us biologists and their truck to lead trips out on Owens Lake. Significant expense. And also often kick in a little money or help us print up bird lists or some of our graphics and things like that. Also working on much more this year on the media stuff. So, boy, I tell you, if you can make things happen, often there's more plums farther down the road you can just, grow and grow. And that helps everybody, because again, it tries to say that everybody had a role to make this amazing thing happen.
Is that the same weekend as the trout opener?
As the what?
As the trout opener?
Yes,
Is it weekend?
Fishing opener too.
Okay. So
And
I get to
Manzanar,
ride up
too.
with my dad.
And Manzanar. If you go to Owens Lake Bird Festival, olbf.org, you can look and see if there's trips that are still open. There is a fee and whatnot, but we have room for about 150 people. And we have 30 different trips and a dinner Saturday night, keynote speaker. It's really pretty neat.
And it's not coincidentally planned during peak spring migration.
Exactly.
So there will be lots more birds here, even though there's quite
In
a
order
few
to have
already.
a bird festival,
Yeah.
it
helps.
need the birds.
It helps.
People get tired of looking at fossils and tracks. So we do pretty well. We make people get their eyes pretty big. There's people that they've birded all over the world, and they will compare this to many of the places they've been on different continents. Anyhow, that's all I have to say. It's great working with these guys.
Great work with you.
This is their new aqueduct manager, an old friend. Hell, he's only been here 26 years or something. He was the basketball referee for my daughter in high school playing basketball at Lone Pine High. Oh, I yelled at him a lot. He's a really nice fellow. Clarence is his name. He's a warm, fuzzy bear.
Can I interject? One of the difficult things in teaching environmental